close relationship that can last us through all the years of our life. No doll can take the place of aces back to back.
Still, you will admit that Mindy's cheesecake is the greatest cheesecake alive.
Marlon Brando was one of Hollywood's greatest icons, a legend on screen and a mystery off it. For decades, fans believed his most private secrets would stay hidden forever. But shocking revelations years after his death changed everything, and suddenly the world began to see a very different side of the man behind The Godfather. So who did Brando really share his most intimate moments with, and why was it kept secret for so long? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Marlon Brando's hidden relationships and the explosive truth that shook Hollywood. Secrets buried with Brando. When Marlon Brando passed away on July 1, 2004, the world mourned the loss of a man often described as the greatest actor of his generation. To most people, Brando was more than just an actor. He was a cultural force who had redefined what screen acting could be. From A Streetcar Named Desire to The Godfather, he built an image of raw masculinity, authority, and charisma that became larger than life. Public perception of Brando in those final years was complicated but still rooted in an old idea of who he was. He was seen as temperamental, rebellious, and eccentric, but still very much the leading man whose private life was assumed to fit neatly into Hollywood's traditional standards. That meant women, marriages, children, and affairs, yes, but always in a heterosexual context. For decades, that was the way Brando was framed in media stories, biographies, and interviews. After his death, Hollywood moved on quietly. For the next decade, there was almost no public discussion about Brando's private life beyond what was already widely known. Media focused on his filmography, his legendary acting technique, and his influence on younger generations of actors. Obituaries and retrospectives praised his craft and his rebellious spirit, but kept his personal story within safe, familiar boundaries. This silence wasn't surprising. Hollywood has long been an industry that knows how to protect its icons, especially after their deaths. For someone like Brando, whose reputation had already been tarnished by late-career controversies, there was no desire to stir up new scandals. Studios, biographers, and even former colleagues seemed to agree on an unspoken rule: let the myth of Marlon Brando stand as it is. As a result, Brando's personal life was left untouched. No new details were revealed, and no shocking stories broke into the mainstream. For more than 10 years, his private world remained frozen in the same state it had been during his lifetime, full of rumors, speculation, and mystery, but without any confirmed truths. And this is where the real story starts to get wild. The Quincy Jones bombshell. In February 2018, Quincy Jones sat down with Vulture for an interview that instantly became one of the most talked-about pieces of celebrity journalism in years. At 85 years old, Jones had lived through nearly every era of modern entertainment. He was no longer worried about protecting reputations or fitting into Hollywood's polite culture of silence. By that point, Jones was one of the most respected figures in music history, a 28-time Grammy Award winner, the producer of Michael Jackson's Thriller, and a man who had worked with everyone from Frank Sinatra to Ray Charles. He had nothing left to prove. Because of his age and status, Jones spoke with a kind of freedom that shocked readers. There was no filter, no attempt to soften his words, and no hesitation in saying things others might keep private. This was what made the interview so powerful and so controversial. He wasn't a gossip columnist or a writer chasing sensational headlines. He was an insider who had been present during some of the most important moments in entertainment history. When the interview was published, people immediately recognized how unusual it was. Celebrity interviews are usually polished and controlled, often shaped by publicists and managers. Jones's conversation was the complete opposite. It was raw, unedited, and full of unexpected revelations. Almost overnight, the piece earned a reputation as one of the most controversial and unforgettable celebrity interviews of all time. One of the most surprising moments in the interview came when Jones began talking about Marlon Brando. He described him in a way that very few people had ever heard before. According to Jones, Brando wasn't just the intense actor people saw on screen. He was also charming, fun, and surprisingly social. Jones recalled Brando going out dancing with him and his friends, saying he could dance his ass off and was one of the most charismatic people anyone could ever meet. But Jones didn't stop at lighthearted stories. In the same casual tone, he began naming names, specific famous names, connected to Brando's private relationships. He stated without hesitation that Brando had slept with Richard Pryor, James Baldwin, and Marvin Gaye. The way he said it was almost offhand, as if he were mentioning something that everyone already knew. He didn't build up to it or frame it as a shocking secret. He just dropped the information as part of an ordinary conversation. That tone made the claims even more startling. Instead of presenting the information with drama or exaggeration, Jones spoke like someone recalling simple facts from memory. It didn't feel like gossip or rumor. It sounded like the kind of thing he had personally witnessed or known about for decades. What made Jones's comments so explosive was not only what he said, but also who was saying it. Quincy Jones wasn't just another celebrity. He was a legend with unmatched credibility. With a career spanning over 6 decades, he had earned the trust and respect of the entertainment world. His reputation as a genius producer, arranger, and composer gave weight to everything he said. The interview instantly went viral. Entertainment news outlets picked up the story, social media exploded with reactions, and fans debated the truth of Jones's statements. Some were shocked, some were amused, and others felt it simply confirmed what had been whispered in Hollywood for years. Regardless of the response, there was no denying that the world was now looking at Marlon Brando in a completely new light. The Forgotten Confession. Long before Quincy Jones ever mentioned Marlon Brando's private life, Brando himself had already admitted something that most people forgot. Brando spoke openly about his experiences. He explained that he didn't see it as a big deal, saying, "Like a large number of men, I too have had experiences, and I'm not ashamed." At the time, this was an incredibly bold statement. The mid-1970s were not an era when Hollywood stars casually acknowledged by. But Brando wasn't the type to play by the rules. He said it directly, without hesitation, and then moved on without offering more details. Even though Brando's words were clear, the American press paid little attention to them. In the US, the entertainment media was much more conservative about covering issues of especially when it came to major stars. Brando's confession was reported in some European outlets, but it never became a widespread story in America. Part of the reason was timing. In 1976, Brando's career was in a different phase. He was still respected, but no longer the young, rebellious heartthrob who dominated Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s. Reporters seemed more focused on his acting roles and his unpredictable personality than on his personal comments about. To many journalists, his statement was either ignored, downplayed, or brushed off as Brando being eccentric. For decades, that quote remained buried in old interviews, rarely mentioned in biographies or press coverage. To the general public, it was as if Brando had never said it at all. When Quincy Jones made his shocking claims in 2018, people began to look back at Brando's old remarks with fresh eyes. Suddenly, the 1976 interview seemed less like a forgotten curiosity and more like confirmation that Brando had been honest all along. What stood out most was Brando's casual, almost dismissive tone. He didn't treat bisexuality as a scandal or a confession. Instead, he framed it as something normal that many men experienced. That nonchalance suggested that Brando never saw his relationships with men as something to hide or be ashamed of. It was the world around him that wasn't ready to listen. Richard Pryor. After Quincy Jones named Richard Pryor as one of Brando's partners, the story spread quickly, but many people wondered if it was really true. That's when TMZ decided to go directly to someone who would know the truth, Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor. When Jennifer was asked about the claims, her answer surprised everyone. She didn't deny it or act offended. Instead, she calmly confirmed that it was true. According to her, Richard Pryor and Marlon Brando had indeed been intimate. She explained it in a matter-of-fact way, making it sound like something that had never been a secret to those close to him. Jennifer also gave context that helped people understand. She said it was the 1970s, a time when many artists were experimenting, trying new things, and living without the same boundaries society expected. For Pryor and Brando, their relationship wasn't unusual in that environment. The 1970s in Hollywood were very different from today. Parties often involved drugs, and people felt freer to explore their desires. Jennifer mentioned that drugs like Quaaludes were common at the time. These sedatives lowered inhibitions and created an atmosphere where experimentation was normal. She emphasized that Pryor wasn't hiding who he was. He was open about his experiences, even if the public never knew. In her view, his relationship with Brando was simply part of that larger culture of openness and exploration. Jennifer went even further by revealing that Richard Pryor had written extensively about his sexuality in personal diaries. She explained that these diaries showed how deeply he thought about his experiences, and that they weren't just the result of drugs or fleeting moments. He was reflective about his bisexuality and documented it in detail. She even said she planned to publish the diaries one day, which would provide concrete evidence of what she was describing. For many fans, the idea that Pryor himself had written openly about these experiences made the story much more believable. Not everyone accepted Jennifer's version of events. Richard Pryor's daughter, Rain Pryor, strongly denied the claims. She criticized Jennifer, calling her an unreliable source and suggesting she was trying to gain attention. This pushback highlighted the tension between personal accounts and family reputation. For some, it was easier to reject the story than to accept a side of Pryor that hadn't been publicly known. Families often want to protect the memory of their loved ones, and this was a clear example of that conflict. Jennifer's calm confirmation, combined with her details about Pryor's diaries and the 1970s culture, gave Quincy Jones's claims new credibility. If Jones was right about Pryor, then maybe he was right about the other names he mentioned too. And the next name on that list was one of the most respected writers of the 20th century, James Baldwin. James Baldwin. When Quincy Jones included James Baldwin among the men who had been involved with Marlon Brando, it didn't shock people in the same way that the names Richard Pryor or Marvin Gaye did. That's because Baldwin had been open about it during his lifetime. Unlike many public figures of his era, Baldwin never tried to hide the fact that he was gay. Baldwin was a novelist, essayist, and social critic whose work confronted some of the hardest truths about race and identity in America. His openness about being gay was unusual at a time when very few public figures felt safe to acknowledge it. He wrote about love between men in a way that was bold, honest, and unapologetic. This made Baldwin stand out. While other celebrities lived in fear of exposure, Baldwin embraced his truth as part of his art. His willingness to speak openly about made him a rare figure in American literature and culture. He gave visibility to experiences that were often erased, and he did so at great personal risk, knowing that it might affect his reputation or career. Baldwin's role in American culture went beyond just being an openly gay writer. He was someone who consistently challenged the boundaries that society set. He wrote about race in a way that forced people to confront the realities of segregation, inequality, and violence. He wrote about love in a way that refused to be limited by gender or social norms. In doing so, Baldwin became a voice for those who were silenced. His work gave representation to communities that were often invisible in mainstream culture. For Black Americans, gay Americans, and anyone who lived outside of traditional expectations, Baldwin's words carried power. He didn't just describe these experiences, he demanded that they be taken seriously. Because of this, Baldwin was both celebrated and criticized. He had many supporters who admired his honesty and brilliance, but he also faced backlash from those who weren't ready for the truths he was telling. Still, Baldwin remained committed to being authentic even when it was unpopular. His openness about wasn't just personal, it was political. It was part of his mission to confront hypocrisy and demand honesty from society. When Quincy Jones linked Baldwin to Marlon Brando, many people felt it made sense. The two men lived in overlapping social and intellectual circles. Both were major figures in mid-20th century culture. Both spent time in Europe, particularly France, where social norms about were looser than in the United States. And both were admired for their brilliance and their refusal to play by the rules. Brando was an actor who had revolutionized Hollywood with his raw performances and refusal to conform to the stiff traditions of the studio system. Baldwin was a writer who had broken barriers by writing openly about race and at a time when few dared to. They were both seen as outsiders in their own ways, men who rejected the roles society tried to assign them and instead carved their own paths. Their connection also reflected a broader truth about the artistic world in that era. Writers, actors, and musicians often moved in the same circles, attending the same parties and engaging in the same debates about art and politics. Brando and Baldwin would have naturally crossed paths in those environments. On a deeper level, they shared a worldview. Both men saw identity as fluid and complex, not something to be confined to rigid labels. Baldwin's writing often emphasized the complexity of human desire, and Brando's life reflected a similar philosophy. Their relationship, if true, wasn't just about attraction. It was about two people who understood each other as boundary breakers. This is why Baldwin's name didn't create the same shock as others on Quincy Jones's list. Baldwin himself had already told the world who he was. For his fans and readers, the idea that he had a relationship with Brando didn't contradict anything they knew about him. In fact, it fit perfectly with the way Baldwin lived his life, openly, authentically, and without fear of judgment. Where Pryor's reality came as a surprise because of his public image as a straight comedian, and Marvin Gaye's alleged involvement was explosive because of his carefully cultivated image as a soul icon, Baldwin's name simply confirmed what people already knew. His openness had laid the groundwork, so the revelation landed more as a reminder than as a shock. Still, it added to the bigger picture of Brando's private world. It showed that Brando wasn't only drawn to comedians or musicians, but also to writers, thinkers, and cultural figures who challenged the same boundaries he did. In that sense, Baldwin's connection to Brando reinforced the idea that these relationships weren't random or reckless. They were part of a consistent pattern in Brando's life. And the most explosive name on Quincy Jones's list was still to come: Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye. When Quincy Jones claimed that Marlon Brando had been intimate with Marvin Gaye, the reaction was immediate and intense. Out of all the names mentioned, this was the one that truly stunned the public. Richard Pryor's story had the confirmation of his widow. James Baldwin's name was consistent with what people already knew about him. But Marvin Gaye? That was something else entirely. Marvin Gaye was not just another musician. He was one of the greatest soul singers in history, a man whose music defined romance, spirituality, and sensuality for millions of listeners. Songs like "Let's Get It" and "What's Going On" had become cultural landmarks. His image was tied to desire, love, and passion. To fans, Marvin Gaye represented the ultimate symbol of black masculinity in music. His voice carried power but also tenderness. His lyrics spoke directly to relationships, intimacy, and spiritual longing. The idea that this same man could have had a secret relationship with Marlon Brando clashed with everything audiences thought they knew about him. It wasn't just surprising, it was unthinkable for many. That's why Jones's claim landed with such force. Unlike Pryor, whose comedy often blurred lines and made people expect the unexpected, Gaye's public image had been consistent and carefully crafted. He was the voice of romance, the face of soulful masculinity. A story like this shook the foundation of that image. One of the most telling aspects of Jones's claim about Marvin Gaye was the response from Hollywood and the music industry. No one rushed forward to deny it, but no one confirmed it either. Insiders stayed quiet, leaving the public to debate and speculate on their own. That silence spoke volumes. If the claim had been completely unbelievable, many expected Gaye's family, Brando's children, or industry peers to immediately dismiss it. Instead, most remained silent. Some fans took that silence as a sign that Jones's words carried truth. Others believed it was simply too shocking to address directly. The media treated the story with fascination. Entertainment outlets dissected Jones's words, while podcasts and talk shows debated whether the revelation could be true. On social media, fans expressed disbelief, curiosity, and in some cases, acceptance. What once would have been considered scandalous gossip was now openly discussed in mainstream culture. The public's reaction showed how much had changed since the 1970s. While many were shocked, others were intrigued by the possibility of seeing icons like Brando and Gaye in a new light. The fascination came not just from the revelation itself, but from what it said about celebrity culture. It reminded people that even the most carefully built images could hide private truths. For Marvin Gaye's fans, the claim created a conflict. On one hand, his music remained just as powerful, his legacy untouched as a brilliant artist. On the other hand, the possibility of a secret relationship with Brando made them see him in a way they had never considered before. It added layers to his story, layers that were both surprising and deeply human. Out of all the names Quincy Jones mentioned, Marvin Gaye's was the one that challenged the public most. It pushed people to question not only what they knew about Gaye and Brando, but also how celebrity images are created and protected. The silence from those who might have known the truth only made the story grow larger, feeding public curiosity. And while Gaye's name was the most shocking, it wasn't the only one, because Brando's love life also included women who would later tell their own dramatic stories. Rita Moreno and the pattern of betrayal. Marlon Brando's relationship with actress and singer Rita Moreno is one of the most famous chapters in his personal life. The two met in the mid-1950s, when Brando was already one of Hollywood's biggest stars and Moreno was a rising talent. Their affair began around 1955 and lasted in one form or another until 1962. At first, their connection was passionate and intense. Moreno has spoken openly about how deeply she loved Brando and how drawn she was to his charm. He had the kind of magnetism that was difficult to resist, and she admitted that she was completely captivated by him. But while Moreno believed she was in a serious relationship, Brando never committed to her fully. During their 8 years together, he married other women and fathered children, all while keeping Moreno in his life. In 1957, he married actress Anna Kashfi, and in 1960 he married Movita Castañeda. Both marriages produced children, yet Brando continued his relationship with Moreno at the same time. This overlapping of relationships created a painful pattern. Moreno wanted exclusivity and love, but Brando was unable or unwilling to give it. Instead, he juggled multiple partners, keeping Moreno close while also building families with others. Part of Brando's behavior can be traced back to his own troubled childhood. His mother was an alcoholic who disappointed him repeatedly, leaving deep wounds that he never healed. Many believe these early experiences shaped his adult relationships, causing him to seek control, avoid vulnerability, and punish women who tried to get close to him. Moreno herself has suggested that his unresolved trauma made him incapable of genuine commitment. For her, the relationship became a cycle of passion and betrayal. She stayed because of the intensity of her feelings, but suffered because of his inability to love her in the way she needed. The Elvis revenge affair. One of the most famous moments in their relationship came after Moreno discovered evidence of yet another of Brando's affairs. Heartbroken and furious, she decided to fight back in her own way. Around that time, she was contacted by Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, who invited her to meet the King of Rock and Roll. Moreno accepted the invitation, and soon she and Elvis began seeing each other. She later admitted that her decision to date Elvis was motivated by revenge. She wanted to hurt Brando the way he had hurt her. This move created one of Hollywood's most memorable love triangles: Marlon Brando, Rita Moreno, and Elvis Presley. For Moreno, dating Elvis wasn't about genuine affection as much as it was about reclaiming power in her relationship with Brando. Interestingly, Brando reacted with jealousy when he found out, proving that he wanted to keep control even when he refused to be faithful. The revenge affair highlighted the imbalance in their relationship. Moreno had been powerless for so long, but by connecting herself to another major star, she was able to get Brando's attention in a way nothing else had. And while Moreno's story shows Brando's impact on women, Hollywood's reaction to Quincy Jones's revelations revealed how the entire industry handled uncomfortable truths. Hollywood's lasting silence. In the weeks after the explosive interview, Quincy Jones found himself at the center of a media storm. His remarks about Marlon Brando and other celebrities had been shared around the world, sparking endless headlines, debates, and reactions. While some admired his honesty, others felt he had gone too far, revealing details that were never meant to be public. The backlash reached a point where his own family stepped in. Jones later explained that his 6 daughters had staged what he called a family intervention. They sat him down and told him directly that his unfiltered style of speaking had crossed a line. They reminded him that while he might have felt free to share these stories, other families and legacies were still affected by what he said. Jones took their words seriously. Not long after, he posted a public apology on social media. In it, he admitted that he had spoken too openly and had hurt people by being so candid. He said that he had learned his lesson and would be more careful in the future. It was a rare moment of humility from a man known for his bold personality. The apology didn't erase what he had revealed, but it showed that even Quincy Jones recognized the weight of his words. The fact that his daughters had to intervene underscored just how disruptive his statements had been, not just to Hollywood, but to families and reputations tied to the people he named. While Jones was apologizing, Hollywood itself took a very different approach. The industry's reaction to his claims about Brando and others was largely silence. Very few stars or insiders rushed to defend or deny the stories. Instead, there was a kind of quiet avoidance. For families, though, silence wasn't always an option. Richard Pryor's daughter, Rain Pryor, publicly denied the claims about her father. She criticized Jennifer Lee Pryor, calling her unreliable and suggesting she had her own motives. Similarly, one of Marlon Brando's sons, Miko Brando, expressed disappointment with Jones's remarks, labeling them as wrongful and unnecessary. These family denials highlighted how difficult it is to balance personal truth with public image. For loved ones, accepting such revelations meant rewriting the memory of someone close to them. For children, it meant facing stories about parents they had known in a completely different way. It's understandable that some would push back, even if others confirmed or quietly accepted the details. On the other hand, insiders, those who had lived through that era in Hollywood, mostly stayed silent. Their lack of denial was striking. It suggested that, within the industry, Jones's claims were not shocking or unbelievable. Many may have already known or suspected the truth, but speaking openly about it would have meant breaking the long tradition of protecting Hollywood's secrets. In the end, the fallout from Jones's interview was less about whether every detail was true, and more about what it revealed about how celebrity stories are told. It reminded people that behind every myth, there are real lives, and those lives are always more complicated than the image on the screen or the voice on the record. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.